Okay guys, how are you? This is, as promised, a little bit of an annotated PowerPoint from today's presentation for those of you who are either arrived late or couldn't make it to class. So I hope it works well for you. Please let me know what you think. It takes time to do these things, so if I don't see that people are using it, obviously I'll find better things to do with my time. We're looking at ecosystems. We've been looking at all sorts of elements of how animals and plants and the natural environment interact with each other during the course of studies this semester. What we're doing at the moment is we're looking at ecosystems. Now, we have to understand that an ecosystem is an interaction between biotic and abiotic factors living in a set space. The basic concept of something being an ecosystem is that you have to have enough range and diversity of different species living in a community and interacting with the abiotic features of that area before you have an ecosystem. And the idea behind an ecosystem is that energy passes through the ecosystem and balances out. You don't need extra inputs to keep it going. So a fish tank, which is the example we used in the classroom, would not be considered a proper ecosystem because you continually have to feed the fish. There aren't enough plants in the tank to sustain enough life, insect life, for example, for the fish to then eat, to then produce enough waste to keep the plants growing and so on. So when we look at the flow of energy in an ecosystem, you need a continual source of input. Now the world is solar powered. Whether it be a fox or an emu or a fish in the ocean, everything got its energy originally from the sun. You might say, how did we do that? Well, obviously we get our energy from plants. Plants are autotrophs, auto meaning they can feed themselves, and so they actually source all the nutrients that they need from soil and from soil fungi and bacteria. They then transport those nutrients through their sap and use energy trapped by the leaves to produce new cellular material. We eat that cellular material, or animals we eat that cellular material and pass that sunlight energy to us. That sunlight energy is lost as heat energy. It's radiated off from the earth every day in terms of energy leaving the earth. We lose energy in terms of keeping our bodies warm, moving around, reproducing, growing, doing all the things that we consider to be characteristics of life. There is a certain amount of energy stored in our body, that is in the molecules that we build to make us what we are. There's energy stored in our bones and in our muscle and in our fat and in all the organs and tissues of our body system. When something eats us, it gets the energy from us. So most of the energy that we consume is lost to our daily activities, and a small part of the energy that we consume from our food is stored in us in the new cellular material that our body builds. So when we're looking at animals eating other animals or animals eating plants, there's a huge loss of energy as you go from one trophic level to the next, and we'll explore that shortly. You need to be familiar with photosynthesis. Now this equation that you've got here is probably the more complex one. It's absolutely academically correct, but it probably is a little more difficult to understand than talking about it in basic sense. You need 6 lots of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is what we breathe out when we break down cellular material. That's then used to make new sugar. You need 6 carbon dioxide. You need 6 H2Os. The plant actually takes in 12 H2Os for every molecule of sugar that it makes, but it only uses 6 of them. So if you can remember 6 CO2 and 6 H2O, sunlight acts, so this arrow here, that means that something's being acted upon. So we take the 6 carbon dioxides, the 6 waters, sunlight acts upon those in the leaf of the plant, in the chlorophyll, in the stacks of grana within the thylakoid, and you make a glucose. Now, one glucose has the 6 carbons that you started out using. It has the 12 hydrogens from water. It has 6 oxygens. Now, you'll notice that there's some oxygen left over. You notice, in fact, that there are 12 oxygens left over. Well, they combine to make 6 O2s, which is the oxygen that we breathe in as part of cellular respiration. If they weren't combined into O2s, it'd be a very toxic gas called superoxide. And the other 6 waters that weren't used pass out of the plant as well. Evaporation takes place during photosynthesis and during plant respiration, so evaporation has to occur through the leaf as well. And this is the energy source for plants and for the animals that eat plants. So without this little sugar here, glucose, there'd be basically no life on Earth. So when we say that something is an organic molecule, it contains the carbon from the glucose that is either produced or consumed. So that's why we call them organic molecules. So basic photosynthesis is that we need water and carbon dioxide to go into a plant leaf. Sun acts upon the plant leaf, upon the chlorophyll. That breaks apart the water and the carbon dioxide, and they recombine through a series of chemical reactions after that, and they make sugar, C6H12O6, and they let 6 lots of O2 go, plus the extra water that the plant takes up to let go as well. All right, now, pretty simple. We've got a producer, an autotroph. You need to remember the word autotroph. Autotrophs produce glucose using sunlight energy. They use that sunlight energy to break apart and reconfigure molecules, so that energy is transferred into chemical energy, which is stored in glucose. If the plant wants to store that glucose for a long time, it has to turn it into starch, because glucose breaks down reasonably quickly. And then that is either used by the plant itself. The plant itself uses a lot of the energy it stores to grow and reproduce and move and do all those things that a plant does. But some of it is stored away in the roots and in the bark and in the stems of the plant for later use. And that's what we eat, and that's what other insects and animals eat. And that's where we get our sugar from. So energy flows through ecosystems. There is an energy flow. It enters through the autotrophs and it exits through the decomposers. So there's something in the middle. Now, for a good ecosystem, you have to have autotrophs. You have to have a way for energy to enter the ecosystem, and you have to have decomposers. You have to have a way for energy to leave the ecosystem, because it's a bit like a bucket of water. If you keep pouring water in, water has to come out. So you can't have an ecosystem without autotrophs and without decomposers. You can do without heterotrophs. That's us. We're actually quite disposable. And in fact, a healthy ecosystem can be measured by the number of heterotrophs that can survive in it, because we depend entirely on the autotrophs and on the decomposers. If either gives up or goes away, there's a plug to energy flow, and that either kills us with toxic waste or kills us through lack of food. So there are different kinds of primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. Primary consumers are always herbivores, because primary consumers eat plants or herbs. Secondary consumers can be a mix. Secondary consumers can be omnivores, so a bit like us. We eat our salad vegetables and we also eat cow. And they can be things that are purely carnivores, things like dogs and cats and so on. You could argue that they're omnivores as well, because, you know, the dog will get into the rubbish, but primarily they're carnivores. They go for meat. Now, the reason why they go for meat is you only have to eat a small amount of meat to get a concentrated source of energy from literally acres of grass that's been consumed, in the case of a cow. And so it's a really easy and lazy way of getting energy. The problem with being a secondary consumer or a tertiary consumer is that you've got to rely on heaps of primary consumers to make enough secondary consumers available for a tertiary consumer to get a meal. So you tend to find, as you go from primary consumers to secondary to tertiary, the numbers get dramatically smaller. And that brings us to food chains. Now, I'm going to stop on this one, and I'm going to start again on a second video to help walk you through food chains. But basically, food chains are like a street map of where the energy goes. you're not actually looking at the plants and the animals, you're looking at energy flow. Food chains go from producers or autotrophs through to the heterotrophs. So this one, obviously, a deer is a herbivore, and then a bear is a carnivore. So that's a very simple food chain. And then you get the detrivores. So a wolf might attack the bear, and then you get the detrivores who then eat the wolf when it dies, or eat bits of the bear that the wolf doesn't eat, that sort of thing. And then you go down to the fungi, the worms, and the insects, which are the most crucial and plentiful of all of the detrivores or the decomposers. They are vital to an ecosystem. If you take these guys out, or if you take these guys out, your ecosystem collapses. If you take out one of these guys, no one really minds that much. And it's quite surprising when you think about that. All right, I'll see you on the next video if you are still interested.